There's so much that lives inside of us, and there are times when what is inside feels like too much to carry. And as the weight is heavy and the clouds surround, our hearts are looking for a light in the dark.
You don't know me, Pastor Brad, and I am so glad that you're connecting with us. Our message series right now is called A Light in the Dark. Now, if you haven't already listened to our message from last week, I really want to encourage you to do that because it sets the foundation for where we're going to be going for the next several weeks. We're going to probably have about 3 more weeks all total of what we're doing this week and 2 more, talking about specific areas of this concept we call mental health. But all of it bases on what we talked about last week. And last week we did say that there are multiple reasons that go into, or multiple roots that have an effect on our mental health and that can often produce darkness that we find ourselves in. Now, we didn't touch into the whole theological realm of the fact that there is sin in this world. Was anyone unaware that there's sin in the world? Did anybody not know that? That there's brokenness and things that don't work the right way? Okay, well, that's true, and that has affected our bodies, our minds, other people. That's all in there. But then we said that there are 5 specific ways, things that relate to our chemistry, how we're wired, our DNA, all that stuff. We talked about our connections, our relationships with people, the fact that there are circumstances that we live in, that we live through, that there is our conscience, the way we speak to ourselves. We talked about that from the heart is the wellspring of life and why we need to guard it. And then all of those, we said a lot of those are outside of our control. A lot of those are things done to us or we find ourselves in. But the last one, the wild card, were my choices, the things I choose to do in light of it. And that's kind of where we said that wisdom or knowledge, or excuse me, understanding or knowledge intersected with wisdom, meaning what do we do with the knowledge we can gain? And this week, we're going to keep digging. Last week, we said this phrase, quite frankly, the darkness is real for yourself, for others. Quite frankly, we talked about the fact that there is, when it comes to this idea of mental health, that it's a spectrum. That it's not you're either mentally healthy or mentally unhealthy, but that you're somewhere along that path, that the inner immaterial person that we are has a differing degree of health at different times and different situations and how we respond, but that the darkness is real. Then we said that I need to be real about the darkness that I feel, that we can't just ignore it and hope that it goes away. You can't just be in the darkness and say, it doesn't exist, and then it suddenly get brighter. We cannot ignore the darkness away. But we said finally, and this is kind of a refrain through this whole series, that the only way to dispel the darkness is to let in the light. That is the only way. That is the only cure for darkness. So what does it look like to let light in? And we're going to talk about that some more. Hopefully, since last Sunday when we first started talking about this, you've had opportunities to discuss this around the kitchen table, the dinner table, with different friends throughout the week, hopefully with one of our life groups or other small groups that are connecting. Because one of the things that we believe at Grace Church, let me tell you this, is that people grow better together. It's one of our core beliefs. That God designed us for community. And to wrestle through this, one of the things that the darkness will push us to is to isolate ourselves, is to pull ourselves away from others. When the primary thing we need when we're in a place of darkness is community. And quite frankly, godly community that is going to pull you into the right and the good that God has designed for us. So this week, we're going to take all of that kind of as a background, and we're going to talk about this topic. Anxiety and depression. Anybody in here ever been anxious or depressed? Anybody? Okay, a lot of hands, thank you. The rest of you are dirty, rotten, nasty liars, and we all know it. You didn't fool anyone. We all, at one point or another, have struggled with this. And if you think you haven't, you're actually in a worse position than everybody else who raised their hand. Because it means it's unrecognized darkness. You're in a place where you don't even see it. Now, I'm not saying that everybody has despaired to the utmost and is down that road of something like suicide, or I'm not trying to say that. But what I'm saying is all of us have wrestled with this darkness on one degree or another. And I think we need to be real about it, because when you're talking about these two things, statistically speaking, these are account for the vast majority of diagnosable mental health conditions in the United States. Did some research, and I looked particularly at the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, the National Institute of Mental Health, and the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance. So a lot of these figures and facts are coming from those places. I can get you web addresses if you want to dig more into that. But this isn't just me coming up with some rough ideas. This is from legitimate research. We're going to start with anxiety. Anxiety is the most common mental illness. Around 40 million adults, or somewhere in the neighborhood of 18% of the US population of adults, struggle with some form of anxiety. It is highly treatable, but only about a third, a little more than a third of those who are suffering actually receive treatment, and it develops from a complex set of risk factors. It's not just there's one thing going on that causes anxiety, okay? And you'll see some discrepancy in some of the numbers with percentages here, but these are from, some of the studies are from 2020 and some are from 2017, which is why you'll see some of these percentages not quite adding up. But when you look at depression, this was from 2020, where the other ones were a little earlier. 21 million US adults, which represents about 8.5%, experienced at least one major depressive episode in 2020. And it's not just adults. 4.1 million adolescents, that's 12 to 18 years old, which represents 17%, almost a fifth of all adolescents, suffered at least one major depressive episode in 2020. So if we had 10 teens sitting in front of us here in the front row, at least 2 of them would have had a major depressive episode in the previous year. And also, depression itself is highly treatable, but less than 40% of those diagnosed or of those suffering with it receive treatment. The darkness is real. It is a real problem. And it's easy to think that it's just this one kind of caricature of something else. When you're talking about anxiety, it's not just you're a little worried. There's all kinds of disorders that go into it, from generalized anxiety disorder to PTSD to phobias, specific phobias. There's all kinds of stuff, but the idea is that anxiety is actually debilitating. And we tend to joke about it. You aware of that? There are people who are really actually suffering through this, and we joke. I have a friend of mine, and she's not here this morning because I can't pick on her, because I told her I was going to mention that it's her birthday, but she's not here. But you know where you are. I know you're listening online, and I'm talking about you. Okay, so happy birthday, but she has a thing. And you know your friends that have things, right? Her thing is, if you're wearing a t-shirt and the edge of your t-shirt is flipped up. You know that sometimes happens? We were having a discussion, and she literally reached over while I was talking and flipped down my sleeve. Because, I'm sorry, I have to. It was just something that bothered her. But so many times when something like that happens, do you know what I hear people say? Oh, you are so OCD, right? You're so obsessive compulsive. Here's the thing, that is not obsessive compulsive. And I can't go into all the details here, but I have worked with people who do have OCD, legitimately have obsessive compulsive disorder, and it consumes you. You can't process your next thought without running through these scripts of what has to happen to make sure everything lines up. I bordered on this as a child, where as a very religious child raised in a good place, there were certain things I had to do to make sure I was okay. I always had to step on every crack with my right foot. And I can see some of you are actually chuckling. Well, that's a little funny. It was obsessive for me. I felt something bad would happen in my life if I didn't put my right foot on a crack or a seam or whatever it was. I had to put my right foot on it. Now, I eventually did move past that, but there are people who live in life who literally, they can't get through life without certain things happening. I remember I felt that I was always going to hell as a kid, constantly. Though I was raised religious and I had all these right things, so I had this script prayer that I would run through, and I could run through it about 8, 9 times a minute, and I would do it. And I have distinct memories of when my brother was playing baseball, and I was walking out to help change the scoreboard. Okay, because you remember you used to have to do it. You couldn't always just press a button, right? And walk out, change, and walking down that sideline, I would say that prayer over and over and over and over and over. Because what happens if I got hit in the head with a baseball on my way out? Because I would die and go to hell. I had to say it. I had to say it. I had to say it. Again, I am blessed to have moved past it, but we have to stop joking about these things like they're just this little thing. And then we offer great stuff when people are really struggling with anxiety. Do you know what we tell them? Stop worrying so much. Do you know how helpful that is? 0. We have to stop being dismissive. Now, by me saying this, I'm not saying that every time somebody is anxious or every time someone is depressed in the clinical sense that it is the worst that it could possibly be. There are, again, it's on a spectrum, but we have to have more compassion because the fact of the matter is, and I'm speaking to those of you who are Jesus followers in the room, those of you who have experienced Jesus's redemption and restoration of your soul, we should do everything we can to care for those who are still in darkness. We should do everything we can for those who are broken to receive healing. Remember, we say we exist as a church family to help people live Jesus-centered lives, and we do that by connecting them to the help, the hope, and the healing of Jesus. So we need to be real about this. When it comes to depression, there are also a whole bunch of different categories of it, from major depression to less. There are, and they have funky names. There's adjustment disorder with depressed mood. That was a new one for me as I was doing research. There's all kinds of different ones, but they are legitimate, and they're legitimate in that they are debilitating to one degree or another. Look at it this way. If you're unfamiliar kind of with this world of mental health and how it all functions, in this particular area, this is a healthy representation of a person when it comes to things like depression and anxiety. Because depression and anxiety deal with almost energy levels and what you've got, how you're responding, what you're feeling. But a healthy person moves through life, and there are ups and there are downs. But when you're on an up, it is useful and helpful. Like when we're preparing for this fun day in the park. Saturday before it, Bud is going to be feeling, as kind of our point person, a little bit higher level of energy, really, about it. He's gonna be thinking about it, what about this and what about that? I gotta call this person. That's a healthy thing. Where it moves to is unhealthy, is where you stay at that high level longer than you should, or that it becomes debilitating and you're not able to do what you should be doing in life because of it. Same thing for the lows. There's times after periods like this fun day where probably Sunday night, Bud's not gonna run a marathon, okay? Any other Sunday night, he would run a marathon, but that particular Sunday, he's probably not going to. He's like, you know what, I need to recharge. I've got low energy right now, or I have low output. Well, when it comes to depression, that low stays low too long. Or it's more than just a recovery from high energy or different things, it becomes debilitating. Look at it this way. Here's anxiety. You can kind of see that where normal healthy is, but you kind of go up over it and then you just start vacillating. It's not just this straight line. You have times where it's worse and times where it's better, but you stay higher than you should. It goes on and on. And then the reverse is kind of what you see with depression. You see where the healthy line is, but you go low and you never get back up to where you should be. Those low points are what they actually call in the world of psychology major depressive episodes, where I've seen people literally stay in bed 4 days. I've read the reports of them, as I've worked with them afterwards, where they literally just laid in bed and soiled themselves. They wouldn't even get out of bed to go to the bathroom because they had nothing. They had no energy to pull out of it. Does that sound like darkness? It is. It's real, but we don't have to stay in darkness. Now, there's another one I want to let you know about. This traditionally has been called dysthymia, but I think it's now called something like pervasive depressive disorder or something to that effect. Basically, the idea is you can see that this person sometimes gets kind of up to normal, but they're often kind of floating low under the surface. So this is often not recognized, especially by those who have it, that they're always just a little below where they should be. And this goes on for years. And this can be ignored because it's not as dramatic as the big depressive moments of what's called major depressive disorder. But even things like this, which is considered a chronic illness, can have an ongoing, lasting, grinding effect to us. This is the world that we live in, a broken world. Well, looking at it, I think we can shine some light, but we have to understand what's going on. Now, I am not the expert on these things. I've got background in it, I've got training, but I'm not the expert. I'm not providing all the answers. And everybody's experience with anxiety and depression is going to be slightly different. But I believe that there's some core things that we can look at, some core foundational things that we can understand that will help us as we want to be the light of Jesus into people's lives, where we want to invite the light of Jesus into our lives while we walk through our versions of this darkness. And the first is this, about anxiety, I really believe its root is fear. And by that, I mean this: unconfronted, unexamined, unresolved, misdirected, or misinformed fear. Because the fact of the matter there are things that should make us afraid, right? If an armed gunman would burst through the back door, should we be nonchalant about that? Don't ask Norma, we've already talked to her, she would shoot them. But the rest of us, right? If that would happen, we wouldn't just be like, oh, hey, it's another Sunday. There would be a fearful response, and that's appropriate. It's when the response of fear is greater than it should be, it's unresolved, it's misdirected, or it's misinformed. And when that happens, our worry spikes and stays where it shouldn't be. Now, most people can understand, okay, I can see that. I might rustle a few feathers here with this next one, where I believe this is true. I've heard this in a number of places, and I've seen it to be true. Depression is rooted in anger. You might think, no, depression is rooted in sadness. I don't think so. I'm not saying the sadness isn't a part. I'm not saying, again, that this is everybody all the time. But what I see is the depression is rooted in anger. When we are angry about things not being the way they're supposed to be. When there should be justice, or this should have happened, or this person should have, I get angry about it. And just like anxiety, it's when this anger remains unconfronted, unexamined, unresolved, misdirected, and misinformed, that it develops into this depression. Not depression as like every day I felt sad today, but that debilitating depression that just sucks the life out of you. I really, really believe it is rooted in anger. Because I'll tell you, depression doesn't always exhibit itself like you're, sad and lying in bed all day. Some of the angriest people I've met in life are actually depressed. And it's easier to express for them their anger, their bitterness, their disdain, those things, than to admit that they are broken and in darkness. And so they just let it out in that way. So some of the people that you look at and say, man, that's just an angry person, understand they're probably wrestling with some level of depression, that life is not working out the way that they believe it should. And when that happens and it's unresolved, that's where you get into these disorders. So like we said all along, the only way to dispel the darkness is to let the light in. And we at Grace Church have, again, several core beliefs, one of which is that God's absolutes are what? Absolutely good. If God says it, we say it. If God declares it, so do we. And we want to live by it. So we believe that the Bible speaks to this idea of fear and anger and anxiety and depression. What can we do? What does it look like to let light in? But before we get there, I want to give you a little warning, especially if you feel you're in a place where you're not in that kind of level of darkness, and maybe you want to help some people, and you want to shed some light in. When I go to bed every night, plug my cell phone in, and I check my alarm because I use my phone as my alarm. And one of the things that I always do is slide the brightness all the way down, okay? Then I lay it there, turn the lights off, try to go to sleep. And then I do that because when I look at my phone in the middle of the night, if the brightness is all the way up, I have a particular reaction, which as many times as I do this, and I've done this for years, occasionally I still forget. And believe it or not, although this has been written into my message for a couple days now, last night I did it again. I forgot to turn my brightness off. And one of my kids doing something in the night woke me up. And I listened, I didn't hear anything, but I was curious, what time is it? I want to know how much longer I had to sleep, right? So I reach over for my phone and I click the power button and boom, full brightness in my eyes, 3 inches away. Because if you didn't know, I have contacts, so I can't see. So for me to read anything, it literally has to be 3 inches from my face. I screamed and threw my phone. That's dumb. I know not to throw my phone. I knew that I wasn't in any peril, but just that blinding light had me react, right? Even though I was doing something I wanted, even though it was useful, because I was in darkness, the sudden introduction of light, I pushed back and resisted. Understand, if people are in darkness, whether it's depression, anxiety, or any of the others that we're going to be looking at, you might have a person who even asked for your help push back against the light. Here's my heart's call for you. Do not give up. Have patience. Be kind. Be gracious with them. Continue to shine the light, but you know what? They might need you to only put it up to halfway brightness to start with. Make sense? Now, we are not ashamed of the light. We preach the light. We proclaim the light. But have patience with people as they may react against the light. So let's just look here at a couple places. When it comes to anxiety, we'll look at Isaiah 41:10. Now, this is one of those verses that can very easily be taken out of context. This is a promise made to the nation of Israel in a particular time, particular place, but it has principles that apply to us, and it starts with these words, fear not. Fear not is the most prolific command in all of Scripture. It's estimated around, or different people estimated around 365 times that fear not is commanded in Scripture, or its equivalent, be not afraid or something similar. Do you know what that means? In theory, every day of a given year, you could read a different verse telling you, don't fear, don't fear, don't fear, don't fear. Now, in Isaiah 41 at this time, the context here is Cyrus the Great was coming in to kind of wipe out the Babylonians who had taken Israel captive, right? And they were wiping out the nations. And God is saying, hey, even though this is coming, you can trust in me and my providence. What does he say? Fear not. Why? For I am with you. It is the presence of God that God declares why they cannot have fear. When you are in the presence of God, fear does not have to rule you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. What will he do? He says, I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. We are promised, as those who follow Jesus, if we've accepted that gift of life, accepted his forgiveness, we're told that the very presence of God indwells us through his Spirit. So the presence is not just this outward thing that I try to go to, like in the temple that Israel had. We now have the very presence of God living within us. And that in that presence, God will strengthen us. God will help us. God will uphold us. We can lean on him when the crazy invaders are coming because of the promises he's given us to never leave us or to forsake us. But it's not just here in Isaiah that we see this. Look here in Philippians 4, kind of the quintessential passage that pastors use when you talk about something like anxiety. End of verse 5. The Lord is at hand. That's kind of the context. The Lord is within grasp. Do not be anxious. All right. Now, if you understand the context of what Paul writing here, there are lots of things that are of concern in this world. He lists the things that have happened to him that he's gone through, and you don't go, oh, that's pleasant. I mean, how many of you have been flogged? Anybody? Any flogging recipients? Nope. None of us have. He had. How many of you were attempted to be stoned to death? A few of you? And no, we're not talking about stoned, like rock stones, okay? No, none of us. Paul had. He was shipwrecked. He was beaten. He had all these things. And yet he says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And we've talked a little bit about this idea of prayer before. We're actually going to talk about it again in our next message series, where we talk about some of the rhythms or spiritual disciplines that we need to be engaging in as followers of Jesus. But prayer at its heart is acknowledging and practicing the presence of God, of being in his presence, of being mindful of him, aware of him, and submitting to him. It's being in communion with him. And that's what Paul says, do this with prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Do you know what it means to have thanksgiving? Gratitude. You're saying, thank you, Lord, for being who you are. Thank you, Lord, for doing what you do. If you can be in his presence with that level of gratitude, and then, by the way, this is a side note, we're supposed to let our requests be known to God because he's unaware of them, right? He's sitting up there kind of, well, I wonder what the need, right? That's what's happening. No. This is simply, I want you to let me know. I want you to trust that you can ask me. So often, we just kind of want to sit back with our arms crossed. Well, let's see if God does anything. I've seen that perspective. God's saying, just talk to me. Because so often, in the midst of the things that we think we want and we need, the very act of prayer is what changes us internally to line up with what God has for us. It's a remarkable, again, we'll talk about some more in our next series, but it's a remarkable process. We do not be anxious because we can sit in his presence because he wants us there. And it says, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ. All of our inward struggles can be guarded by the very peace of God, the shalom of God. That's the promise if we'll step into his presence. What about depression? Well, the Bible, I think, speaks about that as well, especially when it comes to this idea of anger. In Psalm 37, it says this, be still, okay? If you remember, we talked about some of us having ADHD last week. I know my dad has told me before, I move around way too much when I preach. He has a hard time tracking me. Well, that's because for some of us more than others, it's hard to be still. Okay? But this is not a physical stillness. This is the idea of a settledness before God, because we see be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. And I know all of you are good at that, right? You are all very good at waiting patiently. Why, Matthew, did you just get stared at by your mother? We'll let that one go. Okay. She bailed you out, but we all know the truth. Okay. We're supposed to wait patiently, be still. Again, it's that presence idea of, here's God, I will trust in who he is. And then he says this, the psalmist, fret not yourself. This is from the Hebrew chara, which is to become hot. And then it can be kind of figuratively used as angry. But you know, we have phrases for that. Hot-headed, right? That he blew his cool. Fret not. This is the idea of getting hot with anger over the one who prospers in his way, not just any way, but over the man who carries out evil devices. So it's a righteous thing to not be happy with this person doing the wrong thing and getting blessed, okay? I'm angry over that, but God is saying, don't get hot. And look why. He says, refrain from anger, another Hebrew word, different one, and it actually literally means flared nostrils or anger. You know what I mean when it flared nostrils, right? A picture of the cartoon bull, right? You know, the nostrils. That's the picture here. Don't get that way and forsake wrath, which again, a different Hebrew word, chema, which means heat or poison. Literally, when it's used figuratively, it talks about anger, but it feeds into that. So refrain from flaring your nostrils in anger, from being so mad that you would poison someone. Fret not yourself. Why? It tends only to evil. And this word evil is the one that literally means to act badly or to treat someone poorly. And we know that about anger. When we have anger, especially unresolved anger, anger that sits deep within us, that root of bitterness that the New Testament talks about in our Bibles, when that just sits there, we tend to not be very nice to the people around us. We're willing to let them know how much we are unpleased with them. And when we're letting that sit there, that unresolved anger will manifest into this depressed state because things just aren't right and they won't get better and they won't get better and they won't get better. And I just feel the weight of that. And so often it's not just the treating of others badly or treating others poorly. I begin to treat myself poorly. And I just let that weight sink down on me. And we see the same thing in the New Testament. In James chapter 1, we read the half-brother of Jesus writing to the early church, "Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger." Slow to anger. It doesn't say don't ever get angry. There's times and places where anger is the appropriate response. There are things, injustices that happen that should not take place, that we should be angry about. But we're to be quick to hear, slow to speak. Again, how many of us are good at that? If you're anything like me, you're actually good at the opposite, right? You're quick to speak, and you're pretty slow to hear. It's easier just to mouth off, tell people what you think. But when we allow anger in, when we allow anger residence, look here what verse 20 says, "For the anger of man," so not this righteous anger over like injustices done to others, but this is not right, this isn't fair, this. And let me tell you, I'm seeing it in one of my particular boys right now. I'm not gonna tell you who, but one of them loves the phrase, "That's not fair." And let me tell you, that just flips the switch for me. And I'm like, okay, son, let's talk about fair. Because I don't think you know what fair means. And we have a good discussion. But in his mind, it's not fair. It's not fair. It's an injustice to me. But quite frankly, his anger is misplaced because he doesn't understand what fair is. He doesn't understand what real justice is yet. Because that anger of man that we can so easily latch onto, you're not giving it my way, so I'm angry at you. Look here, it says it does not produce the righteousness of God. If you remember, as we walked through the Sermon on the Mount, that righteousness idea, often that word righteousness is coupled with the word justice. And really the idea of righteousness is right relationship with God and right relationships with his image bearers, other people. That righteousness invariably leads to justice, the right thing happening for the right reason, for that kind of restorative justice in the Bible of making things right. Not slapping others down, but making things right. When you are angry and you hold on to the angry and you slide out of that depression, you're not making things right. You're perpetuating the evil to yourself and to others. You have to let the light in. And that is the only way to dispel the darkness. Now, in just a minute, we're going to watch a very short video from a buddy of mine. I met him online, and he's a pastor out in New Mexico, actually helps with church replants and different things like that out there. But he started a TikTok series, I guess, on some mental health stuff. It's just a short video, kind of cuts off pretty quick at the end. But he's talking about some of this, so we'll watch that. But I want to give you something actionable this week. I'm going to ask you to do something which might not be normal for you. And yeah, so even if this is not your normal way of doing it, I'm going to ask you to do it. Because the Bible seems to be very clear that there is darkness and that we need to shed light on it. That this idea we shouldn't fear, we should rest in God's presence. We shouldn't hold on to anger, we should pursue righteousness. I want you to do something this week. I'd like you to do, well, kind of two things. First of all, I'd like you in the next day or two to make two lists. Literally write out these lists. One list of the things, the people, the places, the situations that make you angry. And chances are, if you do this honestly with yourself, legitimately, that list will be a lot longer than if I asked you right now if you were angry about anything. But I want you to make a second list, same thing, the people, the places, the situations, the things that you're fearful of, that bring up worry and anxiety. Write those two lists. Because the very first thing about dispelling the darkness is shedding light. Are you willing to write them down? But you need to be specific, okay? Don't just say, I'm angry at politics, okay? Or I'm fearful because of politics. One of the principles I've learned that generalizing is one of the ways that we actually hide our darkness. Because we can create this kind of thing over there that's too big for me to do anything about or really understand. And the stuff inside it that I'm really angry about, or the stuff inside that I'm really fearful of, I don't have to deal with. So be specific. Name the things, name the places, name the people. And be honest, because the only way to show light on the darkness is to be real about the darkness you feel. If you say, oh, I'm not angry about that, this person doesn't bother me, that's not going to help you in any way. You're letting darkness stay, you're keeping a dark corner. But you also have to be transparent, which means don't only share some of it, or just enough to make it look like you did the list, right? Oh yeah, I did that thing, I wrote some things down. But you shared enough so that somebody would think you shared, but you didn't actually share. It's like signing up to go to the gym, but never actually walking through the doors. You don't get credit for signing up. You actually have to go in. That's the transparency. You have to share it all. Get it all out. Because here's the second part. This week, I want you to share that list with another person that you trust. And I would ask that it not be your spouse. Okay? You and your spouse can talk about it, it's fine, but somebody in addition to your spouse or your fiance, your girlfriend or boyfriend, someone else, or if you're really brave, which I would encourage you to be, share it with your life group. That's why we create these groups. That's why we function in this kind of community. God created us out of community for community. And so if you want real light, you need community to bring that about. That's what I'm asking you to do. Write those two lists and share it this week before next Sunday. I'll work on it for a while and I'll get to it. I'm asking you to do that this week because that's going to be the start, I believe, for a lot of us moving past some of this anxiety and depression, this fear and this anger that I've kept hidden or suppressed and that's starting to eat us up.
Let's talk about it. Depression. It's something that a lot of us deal with, especially those who are sitting in leadership positions. I'm a pastor. I'm also the head of our association that our church is in that helps with numerous other churches. I'm a LARPer, a live-action role player playing in my hobby and enjoying it and loving it still. I am on numerous board of directors leading where I can. I enjoy my wife and children whenever I'm around them. I love being home and hearing their voices. I have numerous amounts of places in my life that bring joy, yet I still struggle with depression. Why? Sometimes I don't know, other times it's my own self. But maybe, just maybe, we need to constantly wake up and remind ourselves who we are, especially in the terms of Christ, and understanding who we are around the people around us, so that we continue to do for others as well as ourselves. So let's wake up and have that reminder.